They taught me war before they taught me prayer. The first god I ever knew was my father. Hannibal Barca, general, lion of Carthage, enemy of Rome. I was 9 when he dipped my hand into the blood of a sacrificial beast and made me swear it. You will hate Rome, Hannibal, with every breath, with every heartbeat. You will be her shadow, her plague, her reckoning. I didn't flinch, because by the time I swore that oath, I'd already seen what Rome had done. They didn't just beat us in the First Punic War, they humiliated us. They took Sicily, they starved our ships, they took our silver and left us with chains. Then they bled us again with that tribute, gold paid in shame, year after year. I watched my father sail to Hispania, not as an exile, but as a builder of vengeance. He died with that dream only half finished, so I inherited it. At 25, I stood before the Carthaginian army in Spain, the veterans of years of conquest, and they made me commander, not because of my name, not because of my age, because they had seen me fight, and they had seen what I wouldn't do. I would not hesitate, and I would not forget. I didn't want war with Rome. I wanted balance. A world where Carthage could breathe without Roman blades against her throat. But Rome is a creature of paranoia. She fears silence. She must conquer, or she will choke. When we besieged Saguntum, a city under Rome's shadow, but not her law, I knew what would follow. Ambassadors, accusations, demands for my surrender. And when the Senate demanded I be handed over in chains, I laughed. That was the moment it truly began. Not just the Second Punic War, but my war. I didn't sail to Italy. I marched across Gaul, through allies and enemies alike. Across the Rhone, into the white death of the Alps. They said it couldn't be done. That no army could cross the Alps with elephants, wagons, and men still breathing. We lost half of them, but we came down from those mountains like a curse. And the Romans, gods, the Romans. They weren't ready. I destroyed them at the Trebia, froze them in the winter waters and crushed them with our Numidian cavalry. At Lake Trasimene, I outflanked them in fog and sorted them by the thousands. Not battles, massacres, but still Rome rose. Bleeding, staggering, furious, but unbroken. Then came Cannæ. You've heard of Cannæ. Everyone has. It wasn't just a battle. It was a lesson. I lured 80,000 of Rome's finest into a trap. Let them think they were winning. Then closed the jaws around them with my wings of cavalry. By nightfall, the field was quiet. 50,000 dead, rivers red with Roman blood. Cannæ should have ended the war, but it didn't. Why? Because Rome is not a man. You cannot kill it. You can only hope to wound it deeply enough that it changes shape. After Cannæ, I waited for Rome's allies to abandon her. Some did, but not enough. I waited for Carthage to send reinforcements. They didn't. Instead, they sent silence. You want to understand betrayal? It doesn't always come with a dagger. Sometimes, it arrives as an empty dock. I stood in Italy for 15 years. Not just surviving, dominating, but always underfed, underfunded, under-reinforced. I built alliances. I raised armies. I won battles, but I was alone. Carthage, my city, feared my power, feared that if I won the war, I might return home too strong. So they gave me just enough to bleed, but never enough to finish, and Rome adapted. A boy survived Cannæ, a boy named Scipio, and one day, he would become the only man to ever understand me. But in those years, I still believed I could win. I married an Italian noble's daughter. I spoke Latin better than some senators. I didn't just conquer, I listened. That was my mistake. Because when you begin to see your enemy as human, you start to lose your edge. Rome sent wave after wave, consuls, armies, dictators, all of them fell. But behind the scenes, Scipio rose. He studied me. He learned how I thought. He burned my supply lines in Hispania. He broke our brothers in Becula. He was dragging Carthage into the open, into a war she had tried to keep safely on Italian soil. Then the unthinkable happened. They called me home. Imagine standing on the cusp of history, only to be pulled backward by cowardice. Carthage had grown tired of waiting. Rome had found its equal. Scipio was in Africa now, in my homeland, and I was to face him. The boy I had once ignored had become my mirror. And in that final march to Zama, I knew what I was walking toward. Not just a battle, not just an end, a reckoning. They say the gods of Rome abandoned us that day. Cannæ? I was 17, too young to wear the purple stripe, too old to hide behind the walls of the city. I wasn't a general, not yet. I was a witness. One of a handful who saw what Hannibal did and lived to speak of it. You cannot imagine what it's like to walk through a field where 50,000 Romans lie butchered, some with shields still clenched in fists, others headless from behind, run down as they fled. The stench was unreal, the silence worse. Cannæ wasn't just a loss. It was a message. Rome could bleed, but it was also a baptism. That day, I stopped being the son of Publius Scipio and became something else. Something Rome would one day need. I did not fear Hannibal. I studied him. Where others saw madness in his marches, I saw rhythm. Where others feared his elephants, I saw how they died. I devoured every whisper of his victories and every rumor of his setbacks. I learned the way he thought, and I waited. Rome, for all its glory, was slow to learn. After Cannæ, we flailed. We elected fools, cowards, men of vengeance instead of vision. We begged the gods, offered sacrifices, sent delegations to oracles, but Hannibal wasn't in the clouds. He was in Italy, and he was winning, so I rose. Not by age or birth, but by necessity. At 25, they made me commander in Hispania, where Carthage bred its war. It was the same age Hannibal had been. Maybe the gods hadn't abandoned us. Maybe they were just waiting. My first campaign wasn't grand. It was strategic. I didn't rush into glory. I cut their supply lines. I shattered alliances. I used gold where swords were wasteful. I convinced cities to betray Carthage before they ever saw my standards. I learned betrayal is more precise than bloodshed. In Carthago Nova, I marched in silence under cover of storm. I seized their harbor while their guards sought shelter. We took the city before they even realized we were coming. From there, I built, not just roads, not just ports, reputation. They began to whisper that I was Rome's answer to Hannibal. I didn't deny it, but even then, I knew I could never defeat him in Italy. There, he was rooted like a cursed tree, fed by old grudges and Roman mistakes. To kill Hannibal, I had to kill the myth. And that meant striking Carthage, where it hurt. So I returned home and made my case, not just to generals, to the Senate. They called me reckless, arrogant. Some still whispered I was touched by the gods. Others said I was possessed by them, but they gave me Africa, and I marched. The difference between me and Hannibal was simple. He brought war to Rome because of his father's hatred. I brought war to Carthage because of my city's survival. This was not about vengeance. It was about finality. When I landed on the shores of Africa, I wasn't the boy from Cannæ anymore. I was the man Hannibal would have to answer to. I burned crops. I scattered armies. I made allies of Carthage's enemies. I played their game with my rules. And I forced their hand. They summoned Hannibal home. I'll never forget the day we met face to face. It wasn't on the battlefield. It was in a neutral tent, under white linen, where neither of us wore armor. He looked older than I imagined, thinner, eyes like coals, burned down, but still hot. He spoke first. "You have studied me well," I replied. "You made yourself a lesson." He smiled at that. And then he said, "Let's not pretend this can be stopped." We both knew it couldn't. There was too much blood behind us. Too many cities burned. Too many oaths made long before either of us breathed. This war would end between us. Zama was not a battle of might. It was a battle of memory. I remembered his tricks. The encirclements, the staged retreats, the psychological warfare. And I broke them. I opened my lines when his elephants charged. I split my infantry into lanes. I let the beasts pass through harmlessly and struck the riders behind them. I baited his cavalry, then struck their rear. I turned his strategy against him. He fought like a man trying to preserve a legend. I fought like a man trying to bury it. And in the end, Rome stood, Carthage kneeled, and Hannibal was defeated. The Alps are not mountains, they are gods. Cold, merciless gods made of stone and snow. I led nearly 40,000 men through their jaws, and when we emerged, half were gone, frostbitten, crushed by landslides, lost to Gaulish ambushes. And yet those who survived, they were reborn, because once you bleed on the Alps, you forget how to die. They called me mad. Said no general could move an army from Hispania to Italia on foot. That no one had ever crossed the mountains with elephants and hope intact. They were right, until I did it. From Carthago Nova, I marched with veterans of Spain, Libyan spearmen, Numidian cavalry, and Iberian mercenaries who fought not for Carthage, but for me. We carved through Gaul, bribing, threatening, butchering when needed. Some tribes welcomed us. Others tried to slow us, but none stopped us. I knew Rome wasn't watching the north. They believed the Alps were enough. They didn't understand what I'd already survived. The higher we climbed, the more the world disappeared. Food froze in our mouths. Horses broke legs on invisible ice. Our elephants, those proud monsters meant to terrify Rome, collapsed under snow they'd never seen. Men went blind in the glare. We lost an entire column to a rock slide, their screams swallowed by the wind. At one pass, the enemy triggered an avalanche with drums and torches. It buried 2,000 soldiers and drowned the trail beneath us. We spent 3 days digging through the dead to move forward, not retreat. Forward, because behind us was nothing, and ahead was destiny. When we descended into the Po Valley, the Romans couldn't believe it. They thought they were safe. They weren't. I was no longer marching an army. I was leading survivors. Men who had faced the sky's fury and still clutched their blades. At the Ticinus River, we showed Rome what cold-blooded war looked like. At the Trebia, we let them think they had us pinned, then crushed them with a hidden detachment that rose like ghosts from the river. In the snow, they ran. Roman soldiers, sons of senators, ran. But I was not satisfied. Victory is not enough when your enemy breeds. I wanted to break Rome, so I marched south. Through swamps, disease, and mutiny, I rode the last surviving elephant, named Sauris, while fever burned through my blood. I should have died. One didn't. At Lake Trasimene, I orchestrated one of the greatest ambushes in history. I timed it to the sun and fog, hid 30,000 men in ridges and forests. When the Roman column entered the valley, I let them pass, then I closed the jaws. 15,000 Romans died in 3 hours, many without ever seeing the man who killed them. Rome panicked, and that's when they appointed their last hope, Fabius Maximus, the delayer. He refused to fight me, burned his own crops, withdrew into the hills. He made war not with swords, but with absence. At first, I hated him. Then I admired him. Fabius understood what others did not. That Hannibal could not be beaten in battle. Only by time, starvation, exhaustion, delay. He was right. But Rome didn't have the stomach for a strategy. They replaced him and sent me a gift. Cannæ, the consuls brought nearly 90,000 men to meet me in open plains. So I gave them what they wanted, a battle, but not the one they expected. I placed my weakest troops in the center, let them bend backward under Roman pressure. They believed they were winning. Then my African infantry curled around them. Then my cavalry, having routed theirs, struck from behind. And Rome folded. It was slaughter. So many corpses. The rivers changed course. They say it was the worst defeat in Roman history, but it wasn't enough. Because Rome, cursed, furious Rome, refused to die. They refused to negotiate, even when their fields were burning and their sons were ash. And Carthage refused to help. They feared my victories would make me king. They feared I'd return to powerful. So they fed me just enough supplies to keep fighting, but never to win. That was betrayal, not from enemies, but from home. And yet, I stayed 15 years. No reinforcements, no retreat, just fire and patience, and the memory of that boy, Scipio, who had walked through Cannæ and lived. He was coming for me, not in Italy, but in Africa. And the moment I saw him, I knew. This boy had learned everything, including what it would take to end me. Africa didn't welcome me with open arms. It tolerated me. Carthage still believed in its walls, in its ports, in its senators who feared Rome more than they feared Hannibal's silence. They didn't see what was coming, not from me, but from themselves. Because I wasn't just here to win a war, I came to end a civilization's illusion of security. After my campaigns in Hispania, I didn't return to Rome for parades. I returned with a question. Why haven't we taken the fight to Carthage? The Senate hesitated. The old men feared Hannibal's shadow. Feared that, if we moved our hand from Italy, he'd strike our throat. But I argued the opposite. The way to defeat Hannibal is not to chase him. It's to make him chase us. When Carthage burns, even its most distant sons return. They gave me Sicily, a staging ground, a foothold, and a year later, I set sail with a veteran army. Hardened by Spain's dust and sharpened by my vision, Africa lay ahead. The first city to fall was Utica. They believed their stone walls would hold us until Carthage could respond. I starved them, cut their water lines, offered surrender. When they refused, I set fire to the surrounding grain fields. Smoke rose 4 miles. The Carthaginians blinked first. They sent envoys, demanded terms, called me a rogue, accused me of breaking sacred boundaries. Sacred. Rome had no more sacred ground. Hannibal had defiled it long ago. I rejected every offer. Because this wasn't politics, it was calculation. Massinissa changed everything. He was once a Numidian prince, now a king in exile, betrayed by his own. Carthage backed his rival, I backed him. Massinissa brought cavalry and knowledge. He knew the terrain, the tribes, the weaknesses of their soil and their pride. Together, we raided deep. Towns that once fed Carthage now lit torches for Rome. I wasn't just invading, I was unraveling. Carthage sent Hasdrubal, Hannibal's cousin, arrogant, well supplied. He thought me weak, young, overreaching, so I fed him rumors that we were running out of grain, that my men were deserting. He moved fast, overconfident, and I snapped the trap shut. At the Battle of the Great Plains, we crushed him. Hasdrubal escaped, barely, but Carthage had no more illusions. They were cornered, so they did what I expected. They called Hannibal home, the man I had studied, feared, emulated. Now he was coming back, not as a conqueror, but as a defender, and that changed everything. Because Hannibal was most dangerous when surrounded. He wouldn't retreat, he wouldn't negotiate. He would fight like a man, reclaiming his shadow. So I prepared my army not for a war, but for judgment. We trained relentlessly, drilled until the dust clung to our lungs. I rehearsed scenarios, not of victory, but of adaptation. Because to defeat Hannibal, I had to do more than outfight him. I had to outthink him. Before Zama, he requested a meeting. I accepted. The tent was neutral, stripped of symbols, just 2 chairs and 2 men. He looked tired, but still sharp, like a blade dulled only on the edges. He asked me, "Do you believe history is written by the victors?" I said, "Only if they live long enough to write." We didn't shake hands. We didn't eat. We spoke of numbers, tactics, men, but beneath it all was understanding. We were 2 halves of the same wound. And we both knew this was the last chapter. They say the sea smells different when you return to die. When I stepped off the ship, Carthage looked smaller than I remembered. Not in size, in stature, It no longer pulsed with confidence. Its walls, once proud, felt like the shell of a creature already eaten from within. They summoned me not as a savior, but as a symbol, and I was tired of being worshipped for wars I hadn't finished. They expected a miracle. They expected the boy who'd crossed the Alps, but that boy had frozen to death long ago. What remained was a man made of burden. 15 years of blood, no reinforcements, no gratitude, just cold letters from a Senate, too frightened to lose control, and too proud to admit it had already surrendered. To fear, to corruption, to time. Yet when I saw Scipio's camps outside our gates, I knew something else. He didn't come for Carthage, he came for me. I studied his movements from the moment I returned. He wasn't brash, he wasn't loud, he was methodical. He bled the edges of the city, cut off trade, captured our supply lines, not with brute force, but with persuasion. He turned villages with silver, not swords. That was my trick, and he'd stolen it. I realized I was not fighting a Roman. I was fighting myself, sharpened, disciplined, reflected back at me with Roman steel. That, more than anything, made me feel old. They asked me to negotiate, so I met him. Under white canvas, 2 chairs, no guards. The first thing I noticed was his eyes. They weren't filled with vengeance. They were filled with clarity. He didn't want to destroy me. He wanted to outlive me. We spoke in riddles, questions disguised as parries. I asked him if Rome had finally learned fear. He said, "Rome never forgets." I asked him why he had come. He said, "Because you wouldn't." That cut deeper than any insult, because he was right. The night before Zama, I walked among my soldiers. They were afraid, not because they doubted me, but because they had seen what Rome would become. Relentless. Our cavalry was outnumbered. Our Numidian allies had betrayed us. Massinissa, that vulture, had sided with Rome. Our elephants were no longer the beasts of legend. They were just flesh, easily panicked, turned more often against us than toward our enemies. I stood before my army, and I didn't promise victory. I promised something greater. Tomorrow, we fight not to win. We fight so that Rome never forgets who we were. The morning came cold and windless. Zama, my last battlefield, I deployed with care. Veterans in the center, fresh recruits on the flanks, elephants in front, like daggers pointed at their heart. But Scipio, he was ready. He opened lanes in his formation. The elephants charged and vanished harmlessly through his ranks. Then his cavalry, Massinisses, swept around the sides. It wasn't a battle. It was an unraveling. I tried to reform, shift, anchor my flanks. But everywhere I turned, Scipio had already been. He didn't react to my strategy. He anticipated it. He knew me too well. When the lines broke, I didn't run. I fought, with sword in hand. With the weight of history on my shoulders, I watched friends die. Men who'd survived the Alps, survivors of Trasimene and Cannæ, fall in silence, their eyes wide, not with pain, but with disbelief. They never thought it would end like this. Not at home, not with Carthage silent behind us. When the dust cleared, I was still alive. Scipio offered peace, in the Roman way. Terms, humiliation, tribute, I took them. Not because I believed in peace, but because Carthage no longer had the strength to refuse. I spent my last years as a politician, a watchdog, a memory. They asked me what I would have done differently, and I said this: I would have trusted fewer men and killed more of them. Victory is a strange thing. You dream of it, bleed for it, climb over mountains of corpses for it, and when it finally arrives, it feels quiet. After Zama, there was no cheer in my heart, no eruption of triumph, only silence. Hannibal had fought like a lion in his final hour, and I had outflanked him not with might, but with memory. And that is the cruel truth of war. The survivor is not the strongest, only the one who learns faster. Carthage fell, not in flames, but in submission. They signed away their fleet, their elephants, their right to defend themselves without Roman permission. It was not a treaty. It was a leash. Rome returned me home draped in glory. They called me Scipio Africanus. They gave me triumphal arches, gold, and titles, but titles weigh more than shields. And Rome, like Hannibal, has a long memory. You see, Rome loves its heroes, as long as they stay obedient, and I had grown too large. I was no longer just a general. I was a symbol, and symbols, when left untamed, become dangerous. So the Senate turned cold, my rivals whispered. The old houses grumbled, they accused me of corruption, arrogance, betrayal of republican values. I, who had spared Rome from extinction, now stood trial before the very city I had bled to defend. My brother was exiled. I resigned. I didn't argue, because I finally understood something Hannibal had once told me. Without speaking, the moment you win, Rome begins to sharpen the dagger for your back. Years passed. I lived far from the capital, in a villa by the sea. They say I grew bitter, that I refused to speak of war, that I ignored visitors. That's not true. I simply stopped defending my memory, because history is not written by the victors, it's revised by survivors. And I had survived Rome, but I had also survived myself. Sometimes I think of Hannibal, not as an enemy, but as the only man who ever truly understood what it meant to carry the weight of two civilizations on your shoulders. He died in exile, not at Rome's hands, but by his own. Poison, they say in Bithynia. When Roman envoys came too close, his last words, "Let us relieve the Romans from the fear they have of an old man." That was not surrender. It was mercy. I gave Rome what it wanted, but I also gave it something it didn't ask for, a mirror. Hannibal showed me what Rome might become if it ever lost its soul, ruthless, paranoid, merciless. I wonder if one day, someone will rise in our city who fights not for glory, not for honor, but simply for power, and I wonder if anyone will stop him. Before I die, I'll write these words not for Rome, not for the Senate, not even for my sons. I write them for the man I once hated, the boy who swore vengeance in blood, Hannibal Barca, because I realize now, we were not born to kill each other. We were born to understand each other. Too late. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe for more first-person stories of betrayal, revenge, and history's forgotten truths. Drop a comment. Which titan would you follow? Hannibal or Scipio? This was a clash of titans. You've just heard the war from both sides.